Hi, I'm Sabrina Monarch, and I'm talking today about psychic life, what it's like to be psychic, more or less, and how to incorporate the quality of being psychic into your life. And this is actually going to be a pretty casual chat. Was inspired just thinking about Mercury and Pisces, really. I was working on the forecast, and Mercury moves into Pisces very shortly. I'm a Mercury and Pisces native, and one way that I've interpreted that is having Mercury will relate to how we pick up information, and Pisces information is kind of like from other realms. It can be related to being psychic. And I've always had a very vast imagination. And I had a major transformation some years ago when I was validated by someone else. Someone told me that I was psychic. And the information that I had been swimming in for years thinking was just my imagination, just my creative worldview, the thought that that could actually be valid information on some other layer gave me a lot of confidence and brought me into this stage in my life where I really consider like my psychic world and extrasensory life to be something that I really care to cultivate and have a relationship to, in the same way that maybe an athlete or someone who practices yoga would talk about something that they're working on, like a craft or like an artist. It's not just something that I feel like the way that we talk about psychic qualities can be so vague. And I'll connect it a lot astrologically to Pisces today, just as our astrological connection. And I also think, my Mercury in Pisces is trine Pluto. And I also think quite a bit about how the qualities of being a sensitive person in this world are easily pathologized. Pluto, they're easily taboo. And I've sometimes wondered why people don't talk more about this kind of stuff. And so that's kind of why I'm talking about it today. And I'd be really curious to hear what people think, either at the end of this video while y'all are here, or anyone that is watching this and wants to send me an email. In my practice, I have experience with working with a lot of people who tell me things about their lives that relate to them being sensitive or psychic, and it's stuff that they don't tell people. In intimate company or with friends, I'll tell people about my psychic world, but I don't just put it out on the internet, even though sometimes I wonder if I should. So today I'm kind of dipping into those waters a little bit. And yeah, feel free to ask me any questions as we go on. The first thing that I wanted to address is kind of like a basic thesis that I have for today, which is that having a psychic component to our lives is a natural part of the human condition, and it deserves development and care. But I think everyone has access to it. I think of how animals know how to migrate in certain directions, or dolphins have sonar. There's just these different magical qualities that beings in the animal kingdom seem to possess, and humans have, we have our own complexity. Then psychic qualities to our experience is one of them. But I also see like a kind of psychic shutdown operating in maybe humanity, but also individually. And then there's also a very lush, dynamic psychic life in the world too. But I wanted to address, why do people shut down their psychic capacities? And I'll just lead with that. First is that, to be, I guess, brief and not go, sorry about all these notification sounds. Right now we're in a consensus, like cultural framework, industrial, scientific realm where we really value hard facts and hard evidence. And that itself was a liberation, like the scientific revolution, these advances in technology that we're benefiting from right now and also have their own kind of social, spiritual limitations, etc., at once did liberate humanity from being overly, I guess, superstitious, not able to have an individuated relationship from, a very powerful kind of cosmos and earth. And I'm really truncating this, but basically, like, if you think about medieval times or before that, there's a lot more superstition. And at one point in the solar kind of ascent of reason and rationalism, it really liberated the human mind to the heights that we currently are still kind of riding and experiencing. I hope that was clear. I didn't prepare slides on that part, and that's a really difficult thing to even explain. But why I bring that up is that it's currently kind of a moray or a social moray that if you can see it, it's real. If science approves of it, that has this approval of science, it's kind of like there's this almost religious undertone now, like the secular world, the science world has become our prophets. So information that's outside of that is not necessarily something that we can prove. We have a lot of desire culturally to prove things. On a subtler level, people, when it comes to listening to their own psychic information, they're not sure if they can believe it. So it's not necessarily, is this valid in the eyes of my society or in my culture? Is it that I myself can trust something that doesn't have a metric that I've been told is valid? The other piece that I think causes people to not really engage their psychic capacities is just being really overwhelmed, being in a toxic situation and not wanting to gather psychic information on it. I've heard the story a lot with like people describing as children feeling very overwhelmed by their psychic life, maybe in dreams or being able to see spirits, and just shutting that off because it's scary. I remember kind of distinctly, like it was this one moment as a kid where I was contemplating like how I might not be afraid of the dark, not have nightmares. And I had this feeling that if I really willed it, I could see spirits or see these like beings on the wall when I was like in my room. And that thought terrified me, so I just decided not to. And I don't know, what in my consciousness I was activating, but it was just like a no, not going there. So I think there are these moments where we can decide, like, I don't want to see those things, especially in the way that I'm kind of in my own Mercury and Pisces, exemplifying the archetype way, trying to talk about how we don't talk about the psychic life in our consensus reality. We also don't talk about how to manage it, how to turn it on and off. If it's not real, if it's not valid, if it's just, this emotional or delusional thing, how are we going to know how to work with it? My life changed pretty drastically at this point where I had met someone in the dream plane and then met them the next day in real life. And at that point, my kind of bets about what reality was were just off. And I was like open to this other reality. And for the time since, my life has really involved these other layers or these other dimensions of experience. And I have also felt the internal pressure to be able to speak about them in a way that is intelligible so that I'm taken seriously. And also not to rest on them, to also develop myself in other areas of life so that I can integrate them. Astrology has been a great tool for that specifically because you have these different components of the human experience, the archetypes. And if you do have psychic kind of opening, which I think everyone can be psychic or access that parts of themselves, that part of themselves, astrology is a great tool to translate that information or even really strengthen it. One thing I'll add now, but get to perhaps in more detail later, is that our ability to pick up psychic information is in relationship to like the realm of, I guess, hard facts or hard data, even if astrology is not considered that, but the content of what we're studying. So if you are an artist and you are skilled, classically trained as an artist, perhaps you can channel great works of art. Like there's a psychic connection that you have to these paintings that are existing on some other plane, and you can channel them because you have the skill to bring them forth. So if you practice astrology and you are psychically open, you can access information that's really useful for people, not just based on your own psychic abilities, but based on what you've studied. So I think that one piece of this division between the hard world of data and what's accepted culturally versus the psychic realm, when they work together, there's something really fruitful with that. Then I also took a few notes and thoughts about just the question of why choose to cultivate your psychic abilities. What are the benefits and what are the risks? Because there's both. And I almost think of it as a necessity, like why would you not? And I have so much Pisces in my chart that I think that, part of this, my own spiritual awakening experiences have felt more grounding, like, oh, this is who I am. Like the time I spent adrift thinking that I was a creative person and I had a lush imagination, but that it didn't ultimately mean anything, placed me in a much different context than if what I was thinking about had some kind of merit beyond it just being, pleasant or beautiful or artistic, but that it could actually be important information. The benefits of having your psychic senses developed can just be like a sense of awe and intimacy with the mystery, feeling deeply connected to the universe. You have a better compass. You can know where to go and you can trust yourself. And you have to learn how to trust yourself in a different way because you're working with information that is not necessarily provable. Sometimes it is, if it's like specific information and that you don't have a way of knowing and you check with someone else and they verify, that's a specific kind of psychic ability. But what about the kind of subtle, emotional, not easily qualifiable stuff? You have to develop the ability to know if something resonates or not. And instead of having kind of a set of rules or common metrics of examining reality that, a group of people can stand behind, it's just kind of you in the wilderness of, what reality is unfolded before you. And that brings us into the risk section where there's a lot of, if we're talking about Pisces in terms of the psychic world, there's the risk of delusion. And I think also just misconclusion or misinterpretation of the information that's coming through. And I've also personally experienced that. That was part of what got me so into studying astrology, was, making mistakes in my own life and wanting to know how did I get here and wanting some wisdom to really fall back on. There can be kind of like like an example that I can think of that's like a misinterpretation is that this is more common now and integrated in my experience in a way that doesn't kind of like inflate or explode my consciousness in some way. But if I'm thinking of something and then I walk into a place and there's like a song on the radio that's saying exactly what I was just thinking, um, these like weird synchronicities between my own internal like thoughts that come in and then just an external, like, here's what you were just thinking about. Um, there used to be this myth for me of causation, and I wasn't sure if I was causing realities to happen, or what I was causing, or if other people were causing me to think certain things. And just that was a way to get really twisted up about this information that was coming through. So I found that for that, just simply reading a lot of different texts and books about other people's experiences with their psychic abilities and just the technology around it is really helpful. The way that I think about it and kind of picture and landscape it right now has a lot to do with like radio stations of consciousness and having your own, like everyone has their own personal station. And there's a lot of noise everywhere. Like if you're tuning into a bunch of different stations, that's where you're kind of getting psychic overload. But you can tune in and out of stations at will if you'd like. And learning how to do that has been a lot of fun. Like even one time I read, or it was just recently, about the concept that every time you're upset, you're tuning into the radio stations of a bunch of other people who are upset at the same time as you. It's like not just your own. And you can do the same with happiness too. So you can also like ride a certain like ocean wave of any kind of emotion you want to experience just by tuning into other beings that are experiencing that same thing. So also I just I can try to like have a structure about this, but I have so many thoughts. So if anyone has anything that they want to say in the chat box or anything, feel free. And I'll try to stay in somewhat of an order here. I wanted to explain a few different things when I'm talking about, psychic life. What's this category? And I think my definition is pretty inclusive. And so I'll just name a few different examples of what psychic capacity could look like. One is the simple, like knowing what other beings, so that could be people, animals, plants, spirits, etc., are thinking and feeling. That one is kind of, it's like empathy. And also we would have to consider, we'd have to consider the language that this is coming in through. And that's the part of interpretation and kind of like, did you get the memo in a language you can understand? And so I think that we will tend to be able to hear that information according to the languages that we speak. So astrology is an amazing one for understanding the structures of other people's consciousness. So instead of interpreting a message through your own filters of what that would mean to you, you have these different ways of contemplating the human experience that can help you have a more diverse understanding. I've noticed this with the planets, that a lot of things that you read about astrology, you can keep in mind that these are being interpreted by humans, and that there is also a, you can meditate on what is the objective meaning of Jupiter. We might not touch that exactly, and we don't have to be like austere about it, but it's exciting to know that Jupiter is an entity, and you can tune into Jupiter and get messages that is a different way of receiving messages, receiving insight about Jupiter than what you would find in a book. Again, you might need like the language or the ability to understand what those things mean. There's clairvoyance, so that is like perceiving future, perceiving things that are from other realms. Clairaudience, which involves sound. Both of those involve seeing through the illusion of linear time, for example, like we're experiencing time in this very linear way, but with the mental or spiritual faculties, you can move outside of that linear progression and see how the future is rippling into the present moment. You can have precognitive dreams, where you have a dream that's either a direct expression of something that's going to happen in the future, or like very symbolically, like it's a close image, or something happens in a dream, and then very symbolically something very similar to that happens later that day. This would be a good example of where there's a risk involved, and just how to work around that a little bit. Some people, like, you can project your fear or your anxiety onto the future and think it's a premonition. And so, as with all kind of psychic insights, you don't necessarily need to believe them so strongly that you're not willing to be corrected or to see reality and the progression of life prove you wrong. If you have a vision of the world ending and you really believe the world is ending because of that, you know, there's emotional distress in that and potential delusion. And it also assumes that the future is a fixed thing that we can predict, versus there being many futures, or the potential for futures to be kind of bendy or malleable. You know, all this other kind of psychic fringe potentialities of, you know, viewing the world, if we will give ourselves permission to imagine and dream and think about reality that way. When I was taking notes for what I wanted to talk about today, I was thinking about psychic life as a kind of craft. And I was remembering how, like, I really started out as a writer in terms of my identity in this lifetime. That was one of the first identities that I really had for a long time and was very invested in. And I still am a writer, but it's been so long, and it's not something that I actively think about as much as maybe being an astrologer, like working on other identities that I hold. But I remembered learning about the Muse, and I was a kid, I was like 11 or 12 or something, and I was very confused about what the Muse was. I couldn't piece together, you know, what it was, if it was a person or a thing. It was just like I really couldn't understand. So I asked a few different people what muses were. And I find out that it's this, you know, it could be an embodied person. It doesn't have to be, but it's this energy or this spirit of inspiration that gets a writer to be inspired and produce works of writing. And I then noticed that there was many different relationships that writers had to their muses. There could be writers that, you know, get up every morning and drink coffee and like sit down at their desk and write, and they're very productive and they live, you know, organized, orderly lives. Or there's people that are possessed by their muses at like 3 a.m. in the morning, and, you know, they're just tortured with this gift and this curse of having this muse that inspires their writing. I didn't at the time really think about having a muse or like, you know, go down that path. Really, I wrote mostly because there was a community, and I had friends who were writers and wanted to, like, I just felt called. I didn't really feel a sense of like otherworldly connection to a muse or anything like that at the time. But then when I was studying poetics in college, I had a professor that told us that you can negotiate with your muse. If you are writing, if you have a writing practice and the muse is bothering you at 3 a.m. when you're trying to sleep, you can tell it to come back to you when you're prepared, when you're sitting at your desk writing. And I just really love that she shared that insight, because I had never thought about it so complexly like that before. It seemed like if you had an idea, the moment you had it, you were possessed with it, and you should, get up in the middle of the night to write, which I had done before. And it seemed like a rational thing to do. Like, sure, like the creative bug is in me. Like I should just get up and go write. But the reason I bring this up is that there is a connection between psychic aptitude, or being inspired as an artist, and madness, creativity and madness. And it's not actually necessary. It's kind of like a cultural model for it, or, there's something romantic about it, of being so possessed by creativity that we just, do crazy things for it. But again, not totally necessary. And I think that this reminded me of the balance between the Pisces archetype, which would be where we connect to other realms, and Virgo. How do we integrate it, digest it, organize it? How do we align with it? And there's so many, any way that you are experiencing psychic sensitivity and psychic opening, there's a complementary Virgo process that involves a lot of hygiene stuff too. I have a different, like, even just in terms of, picturing how to talk about the inner experience of just like a daily experience of feeling like a psychic person is very new to me. So thanks for your patience and listening. I've always been able to hear the thoughts that are coming in my mind as kind of like these fully developed sentences, like sentences just like pop into my mind, that sometimes make me laugh. They're like absurd, or other times they're really strangely poetic, and they've changed by the content of my like input, what I read, what I experience. But I've had it since I was a kid. And I remember even at one point becoming self-conscious of it and being like, that's weird, I should stop doing that. But it didn't actually stop. That being said, I watch the way my thoughts change all the time. I have different thoughts if I'm in like a very sacred space, like, or if I make my space like temple-like and sacred and it's clean. If my desk is organized, there's like a crispness that comes into my like mental like radio station. If I let my dishes pile up and laundry and I feel like overwhelmed with not being balanced on the earth plane, the Virgo side of it, I access a lot more thoughts that I tend to not like. There's this sense of overwhelm that comes through, or just, but I also can feel it, in groups of people. Like if I go to a show where I'm around like an outdoor music venue or something, and I'm just in a crowd of people, I can feel kind of the buzz of the group. If in terms of, I think it's fun now. Like there's definitely some days where I feel sensitive, or times in the past where it overwhelmed me, like to receive information from an environment, but now I just like think it's so much fun and I love it. I did have to start like turning it on and off at will. So I might have to think a little bit more about how to describe that process. There's a relationship here though to solitude. I had a lot of time when I was a kid and teenager of like intellectual solitude, I feel like, or just like being in my own space and feeling different than people my age. And in that silence, getting a sense of my own energy, or like the own content of my psyche. I journaled almost every day for most of my life since I was a kid, it feels like. So I just had a pretty clear sense of what my own energy was. And then I could go into these other environments and situations and feel how my own energy changed. And that helped me to get information about not actually the objective reality of other things outside of me, but how they interacted with me. I wouldn't presume to get the objective view on something outside of me because I have like a very limited yet expansive, it could be infinite, but it's still coming from my own consciousness. This one just popped into my mind too, that there's something about permission and energetic boundaries and respect when it comes to getting information psychically. I don't have an interest in knowing things that like I don't need to know. So like secrets about other people, for example, I don't really want to know things that other people wouldn't want me to know. So I don't focus my consciousness in that way. If I was like really investigative and like trying to get in places that were secret, that would be a different construct. And I also really work with this idea that like attracts like, and that is my direct experience. So if I were trying to like find my way in places I didn't belong, I would start to feel invaded as well. So there's, a respect piece there. But it also comes to, working with clients. We open up a container in a reading, and I'll want to hear or sense from their chart. So that's like the map that I have, and talking to them as well allows for some more spontaneous information to come through. I don't want to push the reading in a direction where they don't want to go. And when I first started doing astrology readings, I would feel like I get a lot of like tingly sensations in like chakra centers. And I guess mostly like heart and like third eye and crown and spine are like physical places that I feel. But I would also start to get like a painful sensation if I started to go in a direction in a reading that I don't know why that was happening, but I would start to feel pain. So I would just stop. And that hasn't happened for the last, year or two. It was mostly when I first started out, and it was just a signal of like, don't go there. In terms of the yes signals, like getting those chills, those were really resonant with the people that I'm talking to. Like often we'll both be feeling that that sense of really deep resonance, that there's something in the field that's transcending our own kind of personal selves at that moment, and there's this electricity that enters. And that's something that makes me feel very energized and really love the work that I do. And that particular sensation of getting chills or having like an extrasensory life also helps guide me in my just my normal, everyday life. If I'm kind of deciding if I want to do something or not, and I feel a sense of dread in my body, often that means not to do it. If I feel really electric and like really excited by it, it's usually, it means to go ahead and do that. And even that becomes really nuanced. And again, that's like the whole terrain of having your own personal compass and personal guidance system. There's a learning curve. I have learned that every time I feel electric about something, it doesn't necessarily mean to do it right then. Sometimes it just means that it's an inspired idea, and I still have to decide when the right time is. So it's not like there's this perfect system that will tell you how to do it and how to use it. It's something that you discover with yourself, but you have this sense of freedom and excitement that you're using other signals to navigate and kind of swim through your reality, and not just, some basic, conventional rule. which in my case, just for who I am personally and just what I've wanted to do with my life, if I had listened to the cultural guidebook for me, I wouldn't be here. There's definitely a sense of like, the message that I received from my environment of like, you can't be an astrologer, like that's not a job, and but it felt in a very distinct, embodied, spiritual way for me, like this is my direction, but I'm going to have to use some kind of other sense to figure out my way through here. So in terms of, I wanted to suggest certain activities that really coax out a person's psychic capacities, just to leave that with you. One is that there's an element of belief and faith that goes into this, and self-confidence. I noticed, like, I was sitting with some friends the other day and we were talking about different types of dreams that we've had, like different dream traveling, lucid dreams. And I noticed that there was a thread in our conversation that because we were talking about it, it was more likely that it was going to happen, or that if we learned some new kind of lucid dreaming skill, then suddenly we also had the ability to do that. So there's a certain element of suggestibility and play that comes into this. And so if you're open to it and you're not like, there's this kind of restricted, like, I'll only experience what's allowed, by reality or by the consensus reality. And if science says it's okay, then I'll do it. That's like a signing over your own kind of intuition to some external metric of reality, which keeps, there's a safety valve in that. But if you want to open up your psychic capacities, there's a little bit of edge work in that, of going into certain terrains in your mind that you have been told are not real or not possible. And that's, again, ties into the risk element. It's kind of like opening Pandora's box when we go to places in our own psyches that we've not delved into yet, are very much there. But the simply, being open to it piece, or believing in it, or really like, I know I've talked with so many people that kind of know that they're psychic, but they won't take a stance and really believe in it. And if you do take a firm stance and believe in it, you have kind of this whole world opens up to you that doesn't really open up if you're kind of waffling. That being said, people that don't have a firm belief in themselves in that way can still have, precognitive dreams or have something very psychic happen to them that kind of tips over their trust in that. It's not that it blocks it out entirely. I think it just slows it down and kind of holds it behind a floodgate. And the only, if something rushes over that floodgate and is dramatic enough, then people might, take that realm a little bit more seriously. So if you're not having that kind of overwhelming confirmation of your own psychic capacities, you don't have to wait for that to happen. You can just decide that you believe that you have, psychic capacities. And there's something playful about that too. Like, I've been at different like nature workshops where they have you like sit with a plant and receive information from the plant. And I think some people might think that's a silly thing to do and not even bother. But if you do little things like that throughout the day, like wonder, like, I wonder what that, even like your pets, like, what did they have to say to you? Or is there like any information that you can glean that is non-verbal, non-human, just another form of communication, and see if you can flirt with that idea a little bit. Meditation, silence, solitude can be huge too, just like getting a sense of your own energy and being able to hear your own thoughts and have a read. And it can also involve letting things go or letting things wash away so that you can get more clear on what your energy is, and not just what energies you happen to be attached to at the moment that you check in. And yeah, there's the one that I think I see the most, that I see as just like a hang up for people in terms of accessing their psychic capacities, is thinking that being psychic is a skill that some people have and some people don't. Sure, some people are called more towards it than others, but I think it's also just simply a practice, and you can get better at it the more you practice. The other thing is that if you become really highly specialized or really highly skilled at something that is not necessarily psychic in nature, it forms a really strong container that you can start to receive messages through. And that's why, like, people that are pros at something, like, they almost make what they're doing look like magic. They've just accessed this transpersonal dimension through the craft and like the Virgo skill that they have in something. So that can be a way in too. I wanted to read a passage from this book called Mastery by Robert Greene. It's great. It's like, it's a normal book. It's like a New York Times bestseller. A bunch of people have tuned into this. But it has these like transpersonal and mystical ideas in it. And this is from the section in the beginning called Keys to Mastery. And yeah, I'll just read it and I'll explain later. Many of the greatest masters in history have confessed to experiencing some kind of force or voice or sense of destiny that has guided them forward. For Napoleon Bonaparte, it was his star that he always felt in ascendance when he made the right move. For Socrates, it was his daemon, a voice that he heard, perhaps from the gods, which inevitably spoke to him in the negative, telling him what to avoid. For Goethe, he also called it a daemon, a kind of spirit that dwelled within him and compelled him to fulfill his destiny. In more modern times, Albert Einstein talked of a kind of inner voice that shaped the direction of his speculations. All of these are variations on what Leonardo da Vinci experienced as his own sense of fate. Such feelings can be seen as purely mystical, beyond explanation, or as hallucinations and delusions. But there is another way to see them, as eminently real, practical, and explicable. It can be explained in the following way. All of us are born unique. This uniqueness is marked genetically in our DNA. We are a one-time phenomenon in the universe. Our exact genetic makeup has never occurred before, nor will it ever be repeated. For all of us, this uniqueness first expresses itself in childhood through certain primal inclinations. For Leonardo, it is exploring the natural world around his village and bringing it to life on paper in his own way. For others, it can be an early attraction to visual patterns, often an indication of a future interest in mathematics. Or it can be an attraction to particular physical movements or spatial arrangements. How can we explain such inclinations? They are forces within us that come from a deeper place than conscious words can express. They draw us to certain experiences and away from others. As these forces move us here or there, they influence the development of our minds in very particular ways. This primal uniqueness naturally wants to assert and express itself, but some experience it more strongly than others. With masters, it is so strong that it feels like something that has its own external reality, a force, a voice, destiny. In moments when we engage in activity that corresponds to our deepest inclinations, we might experience a touch of this. We feel as if the words we write or the physical movements we perform come so quickly and easily that they are coming from outside of us. We are literally inspired, the Latin word meaning something from the outside breathing within us. Let us state it in the following way. At your birth, a seed is planted. That seed is your uniqueness. It wants to grow, transform itself, and to flower to its full potential. It has a natural assertive energy to it. Your life's task is to bring that seed to flower, to express your uniqueness through your work. You have a destiny to fulfill. The stronger you feel and maintain it, as a force, as a voice, or in whatever form, the greater your chance for fulfilling this life's task and achieving mastery. What weakens this force, what makes you not feel it or even doubt its existence, is the degree to which you have succumbed to another force in life, social pressures to conform. This counterforce can be very powerful. You want to fit into a group. Unconsciously, you might feel that what makes you different is embarrassing or painful. Your parents often act as a counterforce as well. They may seek to direct you to a career path that is lucrative and comfortable. If these counterforces become strong enough, you can lose complete contact with your uniqueness, with who you really are. Your inclinations and desires become modeled on those of others. He goes on to talk about how that's dangerous and how listening to your inner voices, that force within you, will lead you onto a path of mastery. And in the context of viewing, like, a question that I experience and think about quite often is, why are people closed off to the world of being psychic? Why, when I was younger, did I feel like I had to fight so hard to prove myself that I was legitimate in some way, when a lot of what I was experiencing was this like floaty Piscean world? Or that I remember, being in school or in college, it started to become more intense for me, because before college, I just didn't really think about it as much. It was just the water that I was swimming in. But by the time college came around, I was having like my psychic life was like brimming and like kind of overflowing within me, but I still had to perform as a normal person and direct my mental energy into writing papers that I didn't want to write, and it was stressing me out. And I would think, like, why is this type of consciousness I have not valid? And why now, when I'm so immersed in like being engaged with the psychic realm of life, do I continue to meet people who are afraid that that is not valid in themselves? And it comes down to, well, probably many things, but the thing that I'm thinking about right now is just that we're in this industrial worldview, where, it's a secular society, but there's a romanticism or more religion, made out of consumerism, and various forms of conformity, where people maybe aren't en masse as deeply compelled to just bring forth like the blossoming of their like personal destiny and like the seed form that they are. There's a kind of there's a group think in operation, and this might not be new. This might be part of like what humans do when they're in groups together. But there's a sense that there's something out there, something outside of us, like a whole, the human collective, and this is what's normal and standardized, and I should just become that vision of myself that it wants me to be, and I'll have my survival needs taken care of. But there's a more meaningful and magical way to live, which is to have a relationship to your own personal destiny, which is going to speak to you through events and other people, sure, and like guides, but there's an inner listening that comes through, and like an inner compass that will help us walk the path that we're here to walk. And that involves seeing other realities and seeing messages in our environment that are not distinctly, the same message that everyone can read. There's something, unseen or mysterious about that. And when I think about all of these things together, it feels to me that having a connection to one's own inner guidance, which also correlates with being psychically developed, is some kind of evolutionary necessity. And it does also feed back into the whole group. People that follow their path provide something to the culture that is unique and is something that only they can bring. They're not just being a copy of something that they are being trained to be. So we have like, I guess 9 more minutes left. I'd love to hear thoughts or questions from anyone, if there are any.
Hi, Sabrina. I really can relate a lot to what you have talked about. I'm also Mercury in Pisces, and my Mercury is retrograde, and it's trine Neptune in the third. So I could definitely relate to what you were saying. And I also have a lot of other Piscean energy. And at almost 52, I am now just starting to feel comfortable, because like you said, you're trained to not validate this part of yourself when this is, really who you are. So I commend you at your age, being so courageous in going with that, and being an inspiration for me. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Well, thank you.
So Maria wrote in the chat, thank you, Sabrina. I'm seeing me in a mirror in all that you've said until now. That's cool. I know that like, I have probably said this a few times, but I'll just share it again that when I was learning evolutionary astrology, the myths of Aquarius and Uranus changed my life. Uranus was right on my sun at the time. But the message that was such a revolution to me was that if you're just yourself, like minds will come and find you, that you don't have to alter yourself or use your intelligence to be something you're not, which I feel like is a misuse or kind of like a misfiring of the Uranian electricity is conformity. When it's not, good-spirited conformity, like being part of a group can be fun. When it's done in this sense that's just like, that's, what you feel you have to do. So starting my astrology business and having my blog was part of that. I was like, I'm going to just put my ideas out onto the internet and see like what happens. And it turned out that there are people that resonate with the things that I was saying, but in my immediate vicinity, I had a lot of resistance or like people that just wouldn't really respond to my ideas. And I'd be like, don't you know what I'm talking about? And they'd be like, no. And I just felt so alienated. And it, I'm seeing this pattern happening now just on the internet where the people that I interact with, like relate to what I'm saying, but also feel like you can't talk about this stuff. But apparently, there are like other people that agree. So, thank you for your comments. I'm glad you're here, Cameron, too.
That was the other question that I was going to ask, and it slipped my mind. As far as what were your thoughts on the Aquarian part of the psychic, of being psychic?
Yeah, I think psychic phenomena is, you can find different ways that it connects to each of the signs. But I think in the phenomenal sense, like Aquarius and Pisces are the most psychic. And Aquarius relates to the radio station metaphor I was talking about, like the higher airwaves and channeling. And things like the Akashic records or like the hive mind or higher mind where information is stored and we can access that via our own vibrational consciousness and then have a channel to perceive information that's outside of us, I think is the Aquarius process. And Pisces is like, maybe you're already swimming in that information or something and you're not doing the active channeling work by that time. I think Pisces is relating to these different veils of illusion and like also like ultimate or transcendent truths and like the thin line between the two. So yeah, I tend to consider Aquarius up there with the psychic signs.
Hi, hi guys. Is there time for another little question or comment? This is Lauren.
Sure.
Hi, yeah, thank you. It's such a interesting, much needed to be more universal talked about subject. And when you really think about it, that if we all believe in reincarnation and we know that we have cellular memory, so of course we're tapped into the collective, you know, and we are channeled at times if we're doing our path in a way that is in alignment for the highest potential. However, a lot of times there's a lot of information that if you have a lot of Neptune on your sun or moon, or you might be picking up things that, you know, you don't want to have, you know, like it's not even, you have to ask where is this coming from, or it's like, it's very, you don't always know what you're channeling, you know, like I think once you get more attuned to what's going on, you can pick and choose like what you want to channel, and you know, if it resonates or not, you know how to figure what's truth. However, I think the biggest thing is fear for so many people, and that we're living in this physical realm, and the fear is the consensus, and the Uranus will break up the fear. So we're moving into this, you know, phase where everyone will be using psychic abilities most of the time, and, you know, but we're not there yet. So there's all this resistance and, you know, but it's just so interesting because it's just, as children, like, I mean, like Sabrina, I used to see monsters on a radio channel, like the old fashioned radios. I would see like a face, like, and I said, that's weird, you know, like I'm not like, you know, schizophrenic or anything, but like I would imagine this thing and then I would see it, you know. So it was, and I literally like turned that off. So I just think it's really, when we put the cover on, it limits us in so many ways. And when we are channeled in and we're open to things, I think sometimes we're inspired by something more divine than us. It's for us to be an instrument, for it to come through.
I love that. And I'm so glad that you brought up the fear and like the overwhelm piece of it. And it reminds me, it's like the Virgo counterpart too, of like discernment and being able to take in information that we can digest. And a lot of like, you know,
Yeah.
Pisces and psychic lessons involve like learning what we want to take and not feeling like we have to do anything or solve or fix everything that we perceive. And I feel really liberated recently from this book, Spiritual Growth, Being Your Higher Self by Sanaya Roman. And it's talking about like how to hold an image of people's potential and just like seeing them thrive psychically and give that to them telepathically instead of trying to fix people when you hear about their problems.
Oh, I love that. Love, love, love. That's amazing. That's so true and so beautiful. That's healing for you. That you're holding space for the highest, you know. And then the people pick up on that, and animals pick up on that. So
yeah, it's just, and it's kind of, it's like nonviolent. It's like just holding it out there, but you're not trying to change someone.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Sabrina. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to read what Cameron wrote in the chat. Is
Yeah,
that okay?
go ahead. Beautiful.
He wrote, plants opened up my psyche a lot. Almost all Uranus ruled plants I've worked with, I'm not sure, on the nervous system and have opened the space to pick up information from the atmosphere I was in, which is totally Uranus. I have a resistance to being called psychic, though, brings too many projections. How do you deal with that? That's so interesting that you mentioned that, because that's part of, I have a lot of like reservations about talking about my specific like psychic capacities in public. But also an attraction to talk about it because I feel like it's worth putting it out there so it becomes less like weird or less sensational in some way. I think that what has helped me not have as many projections in my life is Virgo stuff of just being really specific in my self-expression. When I was younger, I used to attract a lot of energy that was very non-specific. Like people would just see in me whatever they wanted to see. It was like my Pisces stuff. And because like I am very wordy, like my blog posts are really long and I have a lot to say. And I've noticed that the more that I have put my own like specific, nuanced, unique thoughts into the world, the more people can see me and don't project onto me. Projections still can happen, but it's just, you know, and even like my website picture is me with a crystal ball. So I play with the whole like psychic thing for fun. But yeah, if people project certain powers onto me though, that I think belong to them, or just in general, you know, if people are like putting something on me, I find some way to deflect it or, you know, bring them back to themselves, or just kind of let it be. But definitely I don't like engage or kind of like, I think part of the wound collectively around psychics or mystics is the kind of abuses of power that they may have had in the past where they really took in people's projections or used that as a form of negative power. So there is something that feels a little bit, you know, like I would be wary of that if it comes up. Thanks for asking. And Linda said we're winding down now. So
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Sabrina. That was fantastic as usual. And thanks for your feedback from our attendees, Cameron, Maria, Wanda, Lauren. And so, Sabrina, we'll see you next time. And thanks very much from all of us.
thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sabrina. Always good.
Thanks, Sabrina.
Thank you.